The following program is brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg and the Catholic Communication Campaign. Visit us on the web at hbgdiocese.org.
Franciscan Media and this local station present American Catholic Radio. Production of American Catholic Radio is made possible by listeners like you. American Catholic Radio is funded in part by Friarworks, Franciscan Ministry and Mission, serving the poor and changing lives. You can be a part of their mission. Visit Friarworks on the web at franciscan.org. And now, here's our host.
I'm Father Greg Friedman from the Franciscans. Welcome to American Catholic Radio, a weekly program designed to help you know your faith so you can grow in your faith. On August 15th, the Church celebrates the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. While the dogma of Mary's Assumption into heaven is the most recently declared dogma of the Church, proclaimed in 1950 by Pope Pius XII, Catholic belief in Mary's being taken up body and soul to heaven goes back to early Christian times. The feast itself is in fact the oldest Marian feast, dating from at least the 5th century and perhaps earlier. We thought we would use the occasion of this feast to do a program on our Blessed Mother, and so we've lined up two interesting guests for you. Producer Judy Zarek will talk with a Catholic freelance writer and English teacher, Ginny Kubitz-Moyer. She's the author of Mary and Me, Catholic Women Reflect on the Mother of God. Judy and Ginny will talk about how her image of Mary has changed throughout her life and how Mary has impacted the lives of other women in a variety of ways. Producer John Feaster will visit later in the program with Dominican Father Peter John Cameron. Since 1998, he's been the editor-in-chief of the monthly worship aid Magnificat. But he's written other forms of spiritual writing, including a new book on Mary and a Catholic update entitled Mary, Mother of God and Our Mother. There's lots more on the program as well, but let's begin our look at Marian spirituality with Judy Zarek and today's Living Faith.
37-year-old Ginny Kubitz-Moyer is a freelance writer, English teacher, and mother of two. She grew up Catholic and attended an elementary school run by the Sister Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, who of course were very devoted to the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Growing up as a young kid, I just really, I admired Mary. I thought she was very beautiful, and, I loved the statues. I loved the May processions. She was always sort of like kind of untouchable, the one up on the pedestal in the corner, and, you sort of admired her, and you knew that she was important.
Ginny's sense of Mary was mostly one-dimensional. She looked up to Mary, but didn't really know why.
That started to shift a little bit around my late adolescence, early 20s, I think, when she started to feel a little bit too perfect and intimidating and remote. And, around the time that I was disengaging from Catholicism, Mary kind of symbolized a lot of the things that I didn't like at that point about Catholicism.
Like many young people her age, Ginny began questioning her faith and her understanding of Mary in college. After leaving the church for a while, she eventually came back while in graduate school. She began to rethink how she looked at Mary. Mary began to take on a different, more developed persona, especially after Ginny got married.
It kind of occurred to me that her yes was a little bit like my yes, in the sense that I had just gotten married. I just made this lifelong commitment to a man that I knew well, but I didn't know exactly what I was saying yes to in the future. You're really going on a lot of faith. And I started to think, that's kind of like what Mary did, really, only she did it to the nth degree, much more so than I did, that she said yes to God, she said yes to becoming the Mother of God, with really no idea as to what that would bring her, whether it would be positive or negative. A big, big shift happened in my view of Mary, and I started to see her differently because I started to see that she wasn't some kind of bland, beautiful ice princess statue, but she was actually a really courageous woman who took a risk and put herself out there. And it took a huge leap of faith, and that she was actually quite gutsy. The experiences of her life started to connect more and more with the experiences of my own. Mary kind of came into my life at certain moments, and without my expecting it, kind of nudged me in a certain direction or made me see how much her life can relate to my own.
Ginny was writing as a freelancer for BustedHalo.com, a website sponsored by the Paulist Fathers, when they asked her to do an article about how contemporary women view Mary.
As I was working on the article, it was just fascinating with the things that people were telling me. And I was thinking to myself, I really need to turn this into a book someday.
That day came in 2008 with Ginny's book called Mary and Me, Catholic Women Reflect on the Mother of God. In the book, she looks at the lives of 46 women and their unique relationships with Mary.
For a lot of women, Mary seemed to be an important piece at times in their life when they didn't know who God was or they didn't know how to connect with Christ, that Mary was somebody who kind of got in there and filled that gap.
One woman Ginny spoke with had been diagnosed with uterine cancer and felt distant from God during that time in her life.
And she said, I had all these questions about God, and I literally didn't feel like I knew who God was, and I didn't feel like I could really pray to God. But she said, I really did feel like I could pray to Mary. I felt like Mary got it. She said, I really felt like I needed to be able to talk to a woman in my prayer life at that time, a woman who could kind of understand what I was going through. And Mary just felt very, very accessible in a way that God didn't at that time.
Writing this book gave Ginny a glimpse into aspects of Mary that she'd never thought about before.
A lot of things people shared that kind of surprised me or made me saw Mary in a new light. And one example is a woman who had lost her husband when she was in her 60s and talked about connecting to Mary as a widow. And that had actually never even occurred to me, that at some point Mary, we don't know exactly when because the Gospels don't tell us, but we know that at some point Mary lost Joseph. This woman shared a really moving story of feeling like she really had Mary's support all throughout her husband's illness and throughout his death and afterwards, as she was trying to kind of come to terms with life as a widow.
Though the book is written by a woman about women, Ginny assures me that men who've read the book have learned much about Mary by the touching stories she relates. And bringing more illumination and understanding about Mary is what Ginny's book is all about.
I hope that when they read the book, they come away with a much more, human picture of Mary, to see her as a woman with a lot more depth and a lot more complexity than a lot of us maybe are used to seeing her.
To find Ginny's book, you can go directly to her blog at blog.maryandme.org. You can also find this link and others at our website, franciscanradio.org. Check it out. I think you'll be glad you did.
You're listening to American Catholic Radio. It's time for Ask a Franciscan, the part of our program where we respond to your questions about Catholic faith and practice. With us today is Franciscan Father Dan Kroger, the Chief Executive Officer of St. Anthony Messenger Press. And in that role, Father Dan directs all our media ministries, including this radio program. He was formerly a missionary and a university professor whose specialty is Christian ethics, how we apply the gospel to our everyday lives. So he's ready now to tackle your questions with producer Sharon Cross.
Well, hi, Father Dan. It's good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too, Sharon. How's things?
Things are good. We have some questions for you today.
Oh, I never would have guessed.
Catherine's message concerns a newly ordained priest at her parish. She's having trouble relating to him because of his young age, and she asks for your advice.
The young priest might be very green in the sense of limited in experience, having a lot to learn from life, basically. And because of that, it can be hard for an older person to relate to that younger priest, not just socially, but also in the sacraments. It's kind of natural. It's an age gap, essentially, and that's understandable. I would suggest for Catherine or anyone in a similar circumstance that it's good if they can try to help this young priest grow in his ability to relate to older adults by inviting him to functions with older adults or inviting him, into conversations. And I think parishioners can teach priests a lot. Young ones especially need some kind of help. They need experience in life. And there's nothing like experience, I think, if someone has learned from it. Wisdom doesn't come automatically. Young priests maybe today, or depends on where they're trained, may or may not have much experience. It just depends on the individual and their training.
Edward wonders if you have any information on why people fold their hands when they're praying.
In praying, posture is always important. We don't know for sure exactly where the posture of folding one's hands came from, but we think it was from the period around the 16th century and 17th century, when it was a way of showing people that you weren't carrying a sword or a weapon in your hands, and it was a way of asking for peace or expressing a openness to talk to someone rather than attack them. There were some bad days there when Christians were killing each other because they considered each other to be heretics and so forth. And that was the gesture, seems to have come there. But you see that same gesture repeated also in India, for example. People show respect to each other, folding their hands, bowing before the person whom they meet. So we don't know the ultimate exact history of it, but we think it came from that era of the post-Reformation.
Sergio's question is about the temporal punishment attached to sins. He asks, why would that be the case even after God has forgiven us our sins in the sacrament of reconciliation?
We are forgiven in the sacrament of reconciliation, but of course we also teach and believe from the Scriptures that God is a God of justice, not only of mercy. Over the centuries, there were some developments there that took place in which they began to look at the sacrament of reconciliation, something like a judge in a court. And you tell your sins to the priest, he's like the judge, and he tells you what your penance is. And the idea was that somehow by the penance you make up for the sin. A restitution kind of a thing, like if someone has a fight with his or her wife or some kind of a problem or steals something from somebody, they ask for forgiveness. It's also important to remember how difficult it is to really bring that relationship back to where it had been.
TJ wants to know why Mary needed to be redeemed since she was always full of grace and conceived without sin.
Because Mary was a human being like all of us. She also was affected by sin in different ways. Not that she committed sin, but that she was living in a world that was affected by sin. And we say that all human beings have been affected, touched by sin, because of the sin, as we usually use it, of Adam and Eve. So Mary needed to be redeemed from that, just like everyone else. But in her case, she was prepared ahead of time to be the Mother of God by the special grace God gave her of, if you will, exempting her from the consequences of the sin of Adam and Eve, what we call original sin.
Father Dan, thank you for answering questions for us today.
Okay, well, thanks. I enjoyed doing it, and it's always a delight to study and to reflect on these things. So thank you.
Well, I think that's about all the time we have for our questions for today. Sharon, thanks for picking out these questions from the many, many emails that we get, both at American Catholic Radio and at our other websites at St. Anthony Messenger Press. If folks want to send us an email question, how do they do it?
They should write to letters@franciscanradio.org, all one word.
Okay, franciscanradio.org is our website. And the email address, again, letters@franciscanradio.org. We certainly welcome your questions.
St. Anthony Messenger, the nation's most respected Catholic monthly, now offers a digital edition to go wherever you go on whatever device you choose. The August cover story is a profile of Blessed Junipero Serra, a friar who was controversial for his treatment of Native Americans and who Pope Francis will be canonizing during his September U.S. visit. Also in this issue is a reflection by James Martin on his pilgrimage to the Holy Land, as well as an article that provides 5 practical ways to cope with the spiritual and emotional effects of illness.
Studies show that people who pray regularly and practice their faith are healthier and happier. I'm Bishop Ronald Gaynor. I want to invite you to experience a positive difference in your life by visiting your Catholic parish and encountering Jesus through the sacraments. Do it for your family, do it for yourself, and come home. Remember that God's mercy is and always will be there for you, no matter what your situation. Visit CatholicsComeHome.org to find a parish near you.
Everyone said it was okay.
I had a life.
They said it was a choice.
I was looking outside for answers.
I didn't want to mess it all up.
It wasn't the real me that went that day.
The life I had, it's gone.
Something inside dies after an abortion. If you're suffering because of an abortion, you may feel alone, but you're not. There are people who understand and can help. Call 888-456-HOPE. 888-456-HOPE. A message from Project Rachel.
This is American Catholic Radio.
The Catholic Church in the United States is making marriage a priority with a multi-year pastoral initiative to explore what sacramental married life means for the Church and for society. We here at ACR are doing our part with today's Marriage Moment, featuring commentator Susan Hines-Brigger. She's managing editor of St. Anthony Messenger magazine. Susan has a BA in Communication Arts from the College of Mount St. Joseph in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she writes the Faith-Filled Family column for the magazine. Susan's topic today is Facing Life's Challenges.
Being married can be relatively easy when things are going well. It's when couples hit those potholes in life that put their commitment to the test. Mark and I know all about that. We hit one of those potholes, and a rather big one at that, 8 years ago when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Before that, we had been sailing along, enjoying life. We were active and heavily involved in our parish and our 2 children's school and activities. But that was before the diagnosis, the fatigue, the fear. To say it turned our lives and our marriage upside down is an understatement. Suddenly, everything we knew about ourselves, each other, and our marriage were thrown out the window. In many ways, we found ourselves back at square one, newlyweds of sorts. Neither of us were ready for the profound way our lives would be changed forever. I was angry about being sick, scared about the future, and frustrated that I couldn't seem to make him understand what I was going through, all in addition to just feeling downright rotten. For his part, Mark has since told me how helpless he felt, fearing he would say or do the wrong thing when he tried to help me. We both turned inward as we struggled to cope, when what we have since learned we needed to do was reach out to each other. Over time, we've come to terms with this for worse part of our vows and moved forward on our new journey. It has meant being open to change and limitations and redefining ourselves in previously held roles in our marriage. In many ways, it's been a daily recommitment to the vows we made on our wedding day. And it has forced us to slow down and focus on the things that matter most to us as a couple. Granted, not everyone's marriage will be touched by something so profound as a serious illness. But there are a lot of things that can throw a marriage off track. It could be an affair, an addiction, financial misdeeds, or a host of other issues. Sometimes it can even be something less dramatic, such as the birth of a new baby or aging parents. The point is, at some time your marriage will face a challenge. Are you ready for it?
To learn more about the U.S. Bishop's Initiative on Marriage, or to send us a question, visit our website, franciscanradio.org. Now let's pause in our program for our weekly Minute Meditation.
Jesus sees a new humanity being born, not in the powerful, the influential, or the well-off. He sees a new humanity being born among those who are not eaten up by abundance, in those who suffer, in those starve for justice, in those who struggle for peace, among those who are strong enough to be humble. Those who have their fill and rest content in their plenty cannot hear the cry of the poor. Only those who themselves are poor in heart can struggle to create a better world.
You're listening to American Catholic Radio from the Franciscans and St. Anthony Messenger Press. Today's guest on Exploring Our Faith with John Feaster is Dominican Father Peter John Cameron. Since 1998, Father Cameron has been editor-in-chief of the monthly worship aid Magnificat, and he has a new servant book, Mysteries of the Virgin Mary, Living Our Lady's Graces, published by St. Anthony Messenger Press. And for our sister publication, Catholic Update, he wrote an issue entitled Mary, Mother of God and Our Mother. To mark the Feast of the Assumption, producer John Feaster spoke with Father Cameron.
Father Peter, thanks for being with us today. And I know you've just published a book, Mysteries of the Virgin Mary, Living Our Lady's Graces. And I thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk with you about the mystery of the Assumption of Mary. But for starters, I'd like to just talk about Marian devotion in the Church. Why do Catholics pray to Mary?
The role of the Blessed Virgin Mary in our life is to make it plain in the most human way that Christ is real, that Jesus Christ is flesh and blood, that God is with us, and that there is nothing abstract about God or our relationship with God. He is as human and as concrete and as pertinent to our lives as our own mothers are.
So when we talk about Jesus and the doctrine of the Incarnation, of course, we're naming the full humanity of Jesus. And in Mary, we see he was born of an earthly mother.
That's right, but even before that, it reminds us of our own humanity, because one of the reasons why people fall away from faith and transpose faith into something abstract is because they've lost something of their own humanity, which is something that the Holy Father keeps insisting on over and over in recent talks that he's given, that we need to be aware of our own humanity. And so when we think about the motherhood of Mary, we can't help but to think about the role of a mother in our own life, not in terms of just giving us life, but of giving us of generating our very personhood.
But now, on the other hand, we do talk about the Assumption of Mary, and that is kind of, for many, it's kind of a theological idea. Can you help us to understand that?
I mean, there are many ways of looking at it. Again, Pope Benedict XVI, I think, has the best way of giving a very clear focus. And he says, while the Blessed Virgin Mary was on earth, people were drawn to her. I mean, you even see this in the film The Passion of the Christ, how the beloved disciple is mesmerized by the fact that Jesus has a mother and that she has a role in his life because of being the mother of the Son of God. But Mary could only reach so many people because of the physical constraints of flesh and blood living. And so the Assumption is a miracle of God's love by which the maternal intercession and the maternal mediation is pretty important, but it all translates into the way in which the love of Mary can be offered to everyone now without any kind of constriction or limitation or restraint. As the Holy Father says, now precisely because Mary is with God and in God, Mary is immensely close to each one of us.
That then becomes a big part of how we put our faith together. If Mary was a person fully like us, which of course she was, and she's really a saint, which we know for sure, the mother of Jesus, and then we do have a special way to see how we are to live our lives too, huh?
That's right. And the fact that Mary, body and soul, is assumed into heaven is a manifestation to us, a revelation to us of what we can hope for, of what we are destined for. So the Venerable John Paul II said that in the Assumption, hope is enriched with ever new reasons. So we all hope to go to heaven, but to have the kind of, what is our life going to be like? Well, we see it now in the life that Mary lives. And all the great saints, the fathers of the Church, say that when Mary is assumed into heaven, there's a tremendous rejoicing in heaven because heaven is finally complete. It has been lacking something until Mary is assumed into heaven. And John Paul II says that Mary communicates to believers an ever-new capacity to await God's future and to abandon themselves to the Lord's promises. So it gives us a way of looking at how we should live our life at this moment with a great certainty, a great confidence, because the eternal life, the happiness that's awaiting for us in heaven also has a mother. You know, the arms that welcomed Christ at Christmas are waiting to embrace us in heaven right now.
Now, if I think about the Feast of the Assumption and I think, well, I'm just here on earth, trying to live my life in God's grace. Is there any kind of thing that I should remember as I celebrate this Feast of the Assumption?
Well, the point is that every dimension of our human life, not just what happens interiorly, not just our thoughts, not just our will, but even our body now, has been given a profound dignity by virtue of the fact that Mary is enthroned with her Son in heaven. So it means, again, quoting John Paul II, we've been blessed with a new capacity to await God's future, and that we can abandon ourselves to God's providences, because whatever it is about our life that becomes difficult, whatever becomes sorrowful, whatever causes us fear, etc., it has its antidote in the mystery that has been revealed to us through the Blessed Virgin Mary.
For Exploring Our Faith, I'm John Feaster.
This is Father Greg here to wrap up this edition of American Catholic Radio. This past May, on a Sunday morning before Mass, I was out in front of my inner-city parish church greeting parishioners, and coincidentally, it was Mother's Day. A young man with a Bible walked up and told me he had a scripture passage to share. He was clearly on an evangelizing mission, and it was something I really didn't think I needed 45 minutes before Mass with my homily for the day rattling around in my brain. Well, after a little dialogue about the passage, he asked me if I could explain our Catholic devotion to Mary. Well, I gave the question my best shot theologically, but I'm not sure my arguments convinced this young Christian fundamentalist. Later that day, I was invited to a Mother's Day celebration at a parishioner's home. Now, this is a big Italian Catholic family with lots of grandkids, and the hostess had planned a traditional May crowning. One of the children placed a floral wreath on a statue of Mary in the backyard. Everyone sang Immaculate Mary. The hostess asked me for a blessing, and I took the moment to tell them about the meeting with this young fundamentalist. And I said that our devotion to Mary is really something we Catholics understand in our hearts. Now, that backyard gathering with the Italian family singing a Marian hymn and celebrating the tradition of May crowning was a uniquely Catholic moment, and looking back, I wish that young Christian evangelist could have witnessed it. It may have answered his question about Mary better than my theological answer. That special moment of family and faith expressed perfectly for me who Mary is as the mother of Jesus and our mother in the story of salvation. You can find ACR archive programs and more on the web at franciscanradio.org, where you can write to us and meet our production team, Sharon Cross, John Feaster, Ron Riegler, Judy Zarek, yours truly, and our executive producer, Matt Wilgoss. At our American Catholic Radio Facebook page, you can suggest ideas and become a friend of the show.
This program was brought to you by the Catholic Diocese of Harrisburg and the Catholic Communication Campaign. Visit us on the web at hbgdiocese.org.